The photograph refused to stay quiet. Evan studied it the way he had learned to study people. Slowly, patiently, looking for what didn't want to be seen. The building in the image wasn't on any current zoning map. The date stamp was smudged, but the architecture screamed older city, pre-renovation, pre-promises. Evan cross-checked records late into the night, the glow of his monitor reflecting off folders that now carried real weight. He found it buried in an archive labeled closed for structural loss. A warehouse fire ruled accidental. No fatalities officially recorded. Officially, the man half caught in the photograph appeared again in a contractor's ledger, then in a campaign donor list, then vanished where paper trails usually end. Someone had paid to make him disappear. Evan didn't rush. He remembered the lesson power had taught him. He waited, gathered, listened. Across town, a former aide named Rebecca Miles watched the same coverage with a knot in her stomach. She had worked under Marcus Hale years earlier, learned to translate smiles into threats. When the old cases resurfaced, she felt the ground shift. She recognized the building too. She also recognized the man. When Evan's anonymous email reached her inbox, short and careful, she didn't delete it. She replied with one word. Yes. Meetings. Followed in places that didn't remember faces. A diner near a highway exit. A library reading room where whispers died quickly. Rebecca brought documents she'd kept for years. Insurance riders, expedited permits. A memo stamped urgent and then buried. Evan brought his timelines. Together they built a bridge between accidents that weren't accidents and silence that had been purchased. The pattern was undeniable. Buildings slated for redevelopment caught fire. Inspectors signed off. Donors appeared. Neighborhoods entered. On a Sunday morning, a long-form investigation dropped online. It didn't lead with Marcus Hale. It didn't need to. It led with numbers, maps, names that repeated until coincidence collapsed. The reaction was immediate. Calls flooded city offices. Protest signs appeared by noon. By nightfall, a task force announced subpoenas. Evan watched from his couch, hands steady, heart loud. The story had outgrown him. That's when the warning came. A voicemail with no caller ID, a breath before the words. A voice trained to sound reasonable. You're asking questions that don't belong to you. Evan didn't delete it. He saved it. Rebecca received a similar call. So did a journalist who had printed the map. The next morning, a storage facility tied to one of the shell companies burned. The fire chief called it suspicious. The city called it unfortunate. Evan called it confirmation. He returned to the records room and found something new waiting on his desk. Slipped between folders like a dare. A copy of the photograph, clearer this time, with a circle drawn around the man in the background. A name written beneath it. Not the one Evan expected. It belonged to someone currently in office. Someone smiling on television, promising transparency. Standing at a podium built from the same old wood. Evan closed the file and locked it away, the weight of it settling in his chest. Justice had been served once, loudly enough to make the city believe the story was over. But the truth doesn't stop when the crowd goes home. It keeps moving, quieter now, choosing its next witness. Evan looked up at the portraits lining the hall, at the practiced smiles framed in gold, and understood what came next. Power doesn't fall all at once. It sheds layers, and somewhere behind another smile. The fire was still burning. The city tried to move on. New headlines replaced old ones. A new face promised reform, transparency, a clean break from the past. Evan kept his head down and his files close, because he had learned that endings were usually just pauses. People agreed not to examine. The cases reopened quietly. Families were notified carefully. Records were amended in language that sounded softer than the truth. Marcus Hale disappeared into the system he once controlled, and for a moment it felt like balance had been restored. Evan stood in the records hall after hours, the lights dim, the portraits watching, and allowed himself one breath of relief. Justice had been served, not perfectly, not completely, but enough to matter. Enough to prove that power could bleed. He shut the cabinet, locked it, and turned away, knowing his life would never return to invisible, and understanding for the first time that this was the cost of seeing clearly. Then his phone vibrated. No number. No name, just a message sent as a photo.it, showed the same smiling official. From the press conference, closer now, cropped tight. Reflected faintly in the glass behind the podium was a familiar shape, a building Evan recognized instantly. Beneath the image were 6 words, typed without emotion. You stopped one fire, not the match. Evan looked up at the portraits again, at the smiles he now understood, and felt the quiet certainty settle in his chest. Someone else was watching him the way he once watched Marcus Hale. Someone who knew he had learned the rules. He slid the phone into his pocket, reached for a fresh folder, and wrote a new date on the tab, because the city wasn't finished confessing yet, and the next truth was already trying to burn its way out.